What fits in a measure? A lesson in musical notation. This is my lesson for my music class for middle school, grades 6 through 8. So the CCSS standard that we're going to be looking at here is NOV. This is novice. NOV stands for novice. MU stands for music. E is evaluate, and PR is performance. So demonstrate using music reading skills where appropriate, how knowledge of formal aspects in musical works inform prepared or improvised performances. So, this is a very complicated standard, so we're just going to be tackling the music reading skills portion of this. So, because in order to complete the standard, students must read music. So we'll assume that by the end of the unit, this is what students will accomplish. But for the lesson here, for this day's lesson, this is the standard written, the student-friendly content standard goal. Students will learn how to read and comprehend time signatures, as well as understand how different note values can fill the space within a measure. So we're going to be focusing on time signatures and note values. However, I want to point out that this lesson will be the second lesson in this sequence for the standard. So in the previous lesson, I will have taught already the vocabulary words that they need to know for this lesson. So they're already going to know, if I've taught the lesson well, all the academic language that we need to manipulate for this lesson. Okay. The ELD standard that we're looking at is apply basic understanding of how different text types are organized to express ideas. That's understanding text structure. So the student-friendly version of that is students will learn how to read and comprehend a math-based question about note values and time signatures structured as a complete sentence. So we're going to be focusing on so it's general academic language. So it's academic language that can be applied to other domains. So basically, we're going to be using closed sentences. I'll explain that later. But that language can apply to, they'll see the same language used in a math class or perhaps other classes as well. And it's basically comparing different ideas in the closed sentence. So, okay. So next, getting into the lesson, the hook. We will basically have, as the students are entering the classroom, I'll be playing some music videos. So live performance videos on the smartboard of a few different artists, a variety of musical cultures, and I'll just play a short clip of each video. And then I'm going to give a little bit of a introductional lecture that just talks about how time signatures are thought of throughout the world. I'm going to touch on some specific examples. The South Indian concept of tala. Tala is an idea from Carnatic music, the South Indian classical music that's like time signatures, but it's a little bit different. Aksakan and Balkan music is their idea of the concept of odd time signatures that they use. Clave and Afro-Cuban music, it's related to meter, but it has some different aspects to it that are not the same. And Gonkonkwi and Ewe music is very similar to the Clave and African music. So the shelter strategy that I'm going to use is close sentences. So you see here, one measure of blank contains a maximum of 3 blank notes and blank half notes. So these blanks are the variables from which the students can put in different values. The values will be basically the academic language vocabulary that we learned, but they'll get to learn about the way these sentences, and this is just one example of how I could structure this type of question. There's other ways I can and do it as well. They'll learn the words like contains and a maxima, these comparative statements that they'll find in their math classes and elsewhere. And the reason why they will be able to understand this stuff is because of the amount of differentiation I'm using in the lesson. So I'm going to jump up here to my UDL representation strategies. I have a lot here, so I'm just going to go through it. So we're going to use physical objects. We're going to use toy blocks to represent note values and break those up into the measures. There's going to be musical oral examples, so we're clap the rhythms. So musical performance is a pretty distinctly different thing than a verbal explanation. So I've listed my verbal explanations here. But the musical example it's more hands-on, and it's just very different. Rote teaching. So this is sorry. Just to differentiate the aspect of hearing the sound of the music and rote teaching in terms of the students learning how to actually physically play the sound and having the sound be something that's coming from their bodies. The rote teaching is a technique that just means learning by doing. I use it in all my classes and all my lessons. Basically, it's because it's very, very effective, especially for beginners. You're basically taking a tiny, tiny piece of whatever you're trying to learn, and you loop it, and the students do it, and then you append more content or more complex ideas to the thing that you're looping, and because you're just stuck in a loop like that, the students build muscle memory, and they're also in a live way able to compare what they're doing against what their peers are doing or what you the teacher are doing. And it basically requires no verbal interaction at all. You just say, do what I'm doing, or repeat after me, or whatever. There's a few different strategies there. Visual and oral. So this last part, we're talking about the musical notation, which is a visual component, and also the closed sentences that we're talking about the same thing, but they're one is written in English and one is written in musical notation. And then the oral component of this is that we'll be reading those out loud. So we'll be reading the sentences out loud, and then there's a way that you can describe musical notation using language. So you can say, like, oh, this is 4 quarter notes in a measure, or whatever it is. And that will relate to, they're going to be side by side, so they'll relate to one another. So with all this differentiation, the students will have a good variety of contexts from which they will be able to understand these ideas. Okay, so student autonomy. There's 3 parts of my lesson where the students get to be creative. At the end of the first cycle, after having given them the opportunity to, I would have taught the concepts verbally, and then we will have clapped some measures where we're speaking the language of the measure, saying, like, for example, taking this example, clap 16th notes in 7/8. So I'll say 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. So basically every two claps for every one word that I'm counting, one number that I'm counting. The students will then, in the check-it cycle, get to make up their own example of this and try it out for class. And so this is a really great way to check for understanding, because it's really exciting for students. So this is not the same as having students come up with an idea and just share it with the class. So they they're coming up with an idea, and then that the class will all do it together. So they're having their work realized in real time by the class. And so it's creatively inspiring, I think, in a very small scale. And usually when I do stuff like this, it's hard to keep it. I have allotted 5 minutes for this, but it's hard to keep it within 5 minutes because everyone wants to try it, and then everyone, even the kids that have already tried it, they'll think of another one that they want to try. So, and the other thing that'll happen almost assuredly is that someone will suggest something that isn't possible, and then we'll have to explain, okay, so we can't do this because of blah blah blah, and so that will for sure come up, which is a nice bonus there. The next bit is so there's a whole kind of social interaction piece here with the toy blocks. The students, I should kind of explain this a little bit. So they're going to have these blocks that they're going to use to make up the measures with the note values that they have, and they're going to use that to connect with other students in their small group, and they have to figure out how to combine their blocks in different ways. And then we're going to go to this close sentence exercise for the connected, but they're going to still have their blocks, and this is kind of a key part of it. So they're going to have their blocks in front of them, what they just used to kind of figure out the previous exercise. So they'll have a physical object they can use to solve these questions basically. And I'm going to have the students come up to the board perhaps and fill in the blanks of the closed sentence one by one. And the thing that's interesting about this is that these are variables basically in a math equation, and whatever you put for one variable affects the value of the other variables. And so if a student puts 4 here, the answer to these other two questions could only be a certain number of things. So you could say 3/16 notes, a maximum of 3/16 notes. Then you have to, actually that doesn't work. So you'd have to do 3/4 notes. And then this answer is fixed at 2/8 notes. So by having them come up to the board and fill in these out, they can try to outsmart one another and create difficult situations for the next person to try to figure out. And this allows them to be creative, and they're kind of competing and collaborating with another at the same time. Okay, and then in the exit ticket, there's the last part of the lesson. They're going to give a note card which they can fill up with any note values that they want to fill it up exactly. And this gives them an opportunity to be creative. It also demonstrates that they have understood what the lesson was about. Okay, so informative assessment. So actually the exit cycle, I guess, does count as informative assessment. It's not really summative assessment. I mean, I guess it is. I guess it is summative in this case. It's kind of debatable. So cycle 1, I already explained what is happening in this check for understanding. So when the students are sharing their examples, I'll get to see, are they able to come up with a coherent example that we can try out in class or not? And then the check it for cycle 2, we're actually translating the closed sentences that we've completed back into musical notation. And so the students will write the musical notation of the closed sentences back on the board, which requires, obviously, an understanding of the closed sentences in order to be able to do that. And then after that, we'll clap them out loud. So putting some differentiation right here in the check it cycle. All right, so the carry it section. So we have the closure. I'm just going to verbally recap everything because it's quite a lot of stuff to go over. So to get through that kind of quickly, so I can get down to this part where this is actually a really interesting part because, in a lesson like this, you want to use very simple examples to talk about the ideas, but there's a lot more complicated examples that you can kind of see. First of all, kind of inspire students to think outside of the box of what they've already learned. So I explain, okay, we learned all this. Now, here's some extra tricky questions. Let's see if anyone can figure it out. The exit ticket, I basically already explained. They're going to be checking, their knowledge of what they learned. And then into the next unit, we're going to be talking. So the next unit will be them teaching them how to hear different kinds of time signatures in musical examples. So I will revisit the musical examples from the hook in this lesson and see how well that they can think about what time signature it might be in. They're not going to be able to do it yet because they haven't had that lesson. And then I'll ask them, think about your favorite music, what time signature it's in, what note values are you hearing in the music? Is it half notes, quarter notes, whatever. Okay, so the next part is a summary of what we've learned in this class. So I think the thing that's most interesting to me is how differentiation it seems to be like the through line to everything I'm learning in this program. And it's obviously just a great solution. And I'm being, loose, I guess, with my definition of differentiation here. But it's obviously, it seems like a universal problem solver for all kinds of things in education. And it just helps make your lessons more effective. So, if you're just, I wrote this just below it. If you're just lecturing, the learning is not happening. So you have to really incorporate other strategies, other contexts for students to perceive the knowledge that they are trying to learn in class. The next bit, including reading, writing, listening, and speaking in music lessons is not an obvious thing to do. So I don't have ELD students. I've mentioned that a couple times in this class, but even if I did, it's incorporating the four elements of language into a music lesson is actually it's not straightforward, because the thing that you want to focus on in a music class is performance. You want the students to be performing as much as possible, because that in itself, music, as I spoke about before, it's a language in and of itself. So more time that they get exposed to that experience of performance, it's a skill that develops slowly over time. So that's why you spend so much time performing. And when you're performing, you're not reading. Well, you're reading musical notation, but you're not reading language necessarily. Writing, listening, speaking. So incorporating those things into a music lesson is not. It's not the default modus operandi, let's say, but it's very it's a very interesting thing to do, and it can also help bolster your lessons in ways that I think I've talked about this in a lot of the class discussions, how a lot of the different strategies can, ELD aside, even can be great just to help teach your music lessons. But obviously incorporating those things into your lessons can help. We learned about those the vocabulary statistics that they're pretty amazing. The students are so many words behind their native speaking peers, and they have to have learn these many words and by this amount of time. I don't remember the numbers, but every single little touch that they can have with the English language, or whatever language, can help them catch up and be more engaged, and give them another another context for language learning that they won't get necessarily in a different class. So it's critical to incorporate those elements into your lessons. And lastly, a lot of the strategies actually involve social interaction, which is it's another thing that a music class doesn't. It's not obvious that a music class would include it, because again, when you're performing, you're playing with other people, but you're not really socially interacting with them with language. So, a lot of times, as long as you are playing with the group, you can kind of be in your own little world, and that is useful for learning music, but it's not very useful for learning about many other things. And so it's interesting to see how the strategies, how many of the strategies in both of the texts that we read are leveraging social interaction of one kind or another to help the students. Here I mentioned this zone of proximal development. So it helps them scaffold each other to the point where they can assist each other to get to that next level. And yeah, I think those are both those last two things I mentioned. They're challenging things to incorporate in a music class, but I think they can be very effective. Some of them are much easier than others, but some strategies are much easier than others to employ in the music classroom. But yeah, I think that's like the biggest takeaways from this course are these things for me. And if I effectively do all of them, I can support ELD learners in the future. Because assuredly, even though I don't have ELD right now, I at some point will, most likely. So, yeah. All right. That's it.